A city in ruins. Wajima on Japan's Noto peninsula laid waste by the earthquake. Food is being delivered by air, but today a Coast Guard plane enlisted in the aid effort met with disaster. Apparently colliding with this Japan Airlines plane just as it lands, which instantly bursts into flames. There are 379 passengers and crew on board.
I was wondering what happened, and then I felt the plane tilt to the side at the runway, and then there was a big bump.
At first, this is all they can see. But as the pilot tries to control the plane, smoke pours into the cabin. Children cry, people shout as they realise the danger they're in. As the flames spread, people start jumping onto an inflatable slide, falling over and running away from the plane.
I heard an explosion about 10 minutes after we got off. We'd have been in trouble if we'd left even a little later. I can only say it was a miracle. We could have died.
The Japan Airlines crew has been praised for saving everyone on the plane.
As that aircraft comes into land, it's still doing quite a high speed when it's collided with something that was presumably stationary or moving at 90 degrees to it. That's a big impact, and it's likely to have torn open perhaps the fuel tank, and that's why you saw such a large fire. Now, the purpose of the aircraft structure is to protect the passengers for as long as possible. The cabin crew of this aircraft did an incredible job. For them to react so swiftly to protect the exits that were perhaps too dangerous to use, to send passengers in the right direction, I think they've done a phenomenal job.
The Airbus burned for hours, eventually breaking up. On the Coast Guard plane bound for the earthquake zone, only the captain survived. 5 crew were killed. Japan's Prime Minister paid tribute to them.
These people had carried out their jobs with a strong sense of duty and responsibility for the disaster-stricken areas and victims. This is a very unfortunate incident, and I would like to offer my sincere condolences and express my respect and gratitude for their sense of duty.
The Prime Minister said it's a battle against time to save more than 100 people trapped in buildings destroyed by the earthquake. Soldiers have been dispatched, but rescue efforts are being frustrated by broken roads. This woman says she's only just got back into her home after a previous earthquake. I don't think we can rebuild again, she says. In some areas, almost every house has been destroyed. The government says the accident at Haneda Airport will not affect aid flights. It says the cause of the crash is, as yet, unclear.
Well, Michelle Robson is a former air traffic controller, and she joins me from Guildford in Surrey. Was this an entirely avoidable tragedy? These 2 planes shouldn't have been using the same runway.
No, obviously they shouldn't, but it is a highly unusual occurrence. There's not been one like this for many years. Fortunately, after the Tenerife incident in 1977, a lot of safeguards were put in to stop this sort of thing happening. But obviously, one of the aircraft shouldn't be there. At the moment, it looks like it was probably the smaller aircraft should not have been on the runway. The preliminary transcript of the air traffic control communications, which I stress is not in any way official, appears to have cleared the Coast Guard aircraft to be holding short of the runway and not actually on the runway, because obviously the Japan Air had been cleared to land.
Right, and so obviously there'll be an investigation into that, but I suppose it could be the kind of emergency situation with the earthquake meant that communication wasn't as nailed down as it should have been.
I don't believe that is actually the case. I suspect it's probably some kind of pilot or controller error, as it normally is in these sort of cases. And unfortunately, normally you'd expect the controller to have noticed that the aircraft had entered the runway, but it remains to be seen what stopped the controller from seeing that. There are some theories that perhaps it wasn't showing the correct label. They should have a label on the surface movement radar that shows the controller where they are when visibility is not as good as it should be. So that could be an option. But I don't believe that the earthquake actually caused any communication errors. From what I've seen of the transcript, it does appear to be fairly normal.
And it was an incredibly speedy evacuation of the passenger jet. This type of plane, it's an A350, isn't it? It held up pretty well, allowing those passengers vital minutes to escape, didn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And modern aircraft have very strict standards. One of those standards is the amount of time it takes to evacuate. So the general standard is 90 seconds to evacuate an aircraft, and that's with assuming that 50% of the exits can't be used, which was actually similar to this case because the overwing exits were not in use due to the fire and the sparks coming from the engine. So they did really well to evacuate under very difficult circumstances. It's natural for passengers to start panicking when they see flames, and obviously there'd been some sort of collision, which must have been extremely worrying for those on board.
Indeed. I mean, you know, when you see something like this, it is clearly terrifying to watch it, especially if you're a bit scared of flying. But I mean, it's still the safest sector, isn't it, the aviation sector? I mean, I think it's safer last year than any previous year, commercial aviation.
Absolutely, and there's now so many safeguards. As I mentioned before, there are many safeguards that were in place at Haneda. For example, the surface movement radar, where they can track aircraft across the airfield, even in poor visibility. There's also a runway incursion tool that stops aircraft going onto the runway when there's something else on there. But in most of these cases, it's normally a sequence of events rather than one single thing, which is what makes it so rare because there's so many safeguards. It takes a lot of those to fail to have something like this. And I think the main thing is that all the passengers did get out safely. So in that respect, all the procedures worked.
Michelle Robson, thanks very much for joining us.